At the Corona Summit in Germany, compulsory testing for unvaccinated people and an end to free tests were decided, but tougher measures could soon follow. This was announced by the Chancellor and the Prime Ministers. Autumn is approaching. Experts and the federal government are warning of high numbers of infections, but at the same time, the number of people vaccinated is growing. The federal and state governments held a relatively brief discussion at the Corona Summit on Tuesday, despite the complex situation. They decided to make testing compulsory for unvaccinated people in many indoor spaces from August 23rd and an incidence of 35, and an end to free testing for unvaccinated people from October 11th. Many observers had expected a long and also conflict-ridden summit in advance. But the federal state meeting was over before 5 p.m., including the Bavarian Prime Minister Markus Söder from the Christian Social Union, and was unable to assert himself with a demand for tougher restrictions for unvaccinated people. But first, let's have an overview of the resolution. There is vaccinations. The federal and state governments urged the population urgently to take advantage of the existing vaccination offers as soon as possible. The vaccination centers will facilitate access to vaccination through low threshold, target group related, and outreach offers. In addition, employers are called upon to support their employees in taking advantage of vaccination offers, for example, through information, company vaccination offers, and time off for vaccination. Then there's the expansion of the compulsory test for unvaccinated persons from August 23rd. From an incidence of 35 new infections per 100,000 inhabitants in 7 days, the 3G rule will apply in the future. Access to certain areas of public life will then only be granted to those who have been vaccinated, who have recovered, or who have tested negative. Unvaccinated persons must then present a negative rapid antigen test that is not older than 24 hours or a negative PCR test that is not older than 48 hours. Children up to the age of 6 and school children are generally excluded because they should be tested regularly as part of a mandatory school protection concept. Negative tests are specifically required for access to hospitals, old people's and nursing homes, and facilities for the disabled. For B, access to indoor catering. For C, participation in events and festivals. For D, use of body-friendly services, that means hairdressers, cosmetics, body care. E, indoor sports. And F, accommodation. Test upon arrival and twice a week during the stay is compulsory. Vaccinated persons are exempt from this test. And then there's the 3G rule, which can be relaxed. Countries can suspend the 3G rule in whole or in part if the incidence of infection is low. The necessity of the 3G rule is checked at least every 4 weeks. And there's the end for free trials from October 11th. In the future, unvaccinated people should pay for their corona test themselves, as all unvaccinated people in Germany can be offered a vaccination. However, people who cannot be vaccinated or for whom there is no vaccination recommendation, such as pregnant women and minors under the age of 12, should continue to be tested free of charge. October 11th is the deadline for the free trials to end. And there's hygiene concepts at events. The Prime Minister's Conference sees a particularly high risk of multiple infections for large events such as concerts, for celebrations in closed rooms or parties. Therefore, organizers have to submit hygiene concepts for these events. For sporting events with more than 5,000 spectators, the permissible occupancy should be limited to a maximum of 50% of the maximum capacity, but not more than 25,000 spectators. This applies in particular to the Bundesliga Soccer League that starts at the weekend. And there's no corona traffic light for the time being. So far, the 7-day incidence has been the leading indicator in this pandemic. If it rises too high, there is a threat of new restrictions, including lockdown. That no longer fits the current situation, criticize many state leaders. After all, the number of people who are vaccinated and who are unlikely to become seriously ill is growing. They want to define new indicators, for example, the vaccination rate or the hospitalization rate, as well as the occupancy of the intensive care units. Nevertheless, the Prime Minister's conference was unable to agree on a corona traffic light for the time being. The decision paper simply states, the federal and state governments will take into account all indicators, in particular the incidence, the vaccination rate, and the number of severe disease causes, as well as the resulting burden on the health system in order to control the further infection process. And then there's the extension of the so-called epidemic emergency. The so-called epidemic situation of national importance was last extended on June 11th. Central corona measures such as the mask requirement or contact restrictions depend on it. It expires in mid-September and should then be extended. There was broad agreement on this at the Federal State Summit. However, this must be decided by the Bundestag, that is the German federal parliament. At the press conference that followed, Chancellor Angela Merkel from the Christian Democratic Union did not rule out further tough restrictions, especially for unvaccinated people in the future. If the incidence increases, the vaccinated would certainly be treated differently than the unvaccinated, said the Chancellor. For vaccinated people, however, there should no longer be such severe restrictions as in lockdown. As long as the vaccine is working, we cannot simply say that a person who has been vaccinated is not allowed to exercise his or her rights as a citizen, she says. The aim of the vaccination campaign must be a vaccination rate in the total population of more than 75%, the Chancellor added. Currently, 55% of the population in Germany are fully vaccinated, 62% have received an injection. It would be very, very good if we were well over 70 or 80%, said Merkel. The Chancellor stated that the vaccination rate should be higher in the particularly vulnerable group of the over 60s, namely more than 90% at the moment. At the table at the press conference, there was someone who would have liked to have gone tougher by now. According to media reports, Bavaria's Prime Minister Markus Söder from the Christian Social Union insisted on further restrictions on unvaccinated people in the deliberations at noon. Söder is a supporter of the so-called 2G rule, according to which only those who have been vaccinated and recovered are allowed access to large parts of public life. Unvaccinated people would then have to stay outside. The 3G rule was adopted at the Corona Summit. Unvaccinated people continue to have access to all areas if they have been tested and can present a negative result, as I said. After the consultation, Söder emphasized, testing alone does not help. Testing is not a new instrument, but an integral part of the corona policy. Germany has been testing like a world champion for months, he says. In addition, the rapid tests are too unsafe. Some prime ministers are still reluctant, said Söder. In September at the latest, however, the subject of further restrictions for unvaccinated people can no longer be evaded, he believes the Bavarian Prime Minister. And he says, we will not be able to pretend to be a debate, to have no debate about 2G in the long run. Söder warned of a creeping fourth wave and a pandemic of the unvaccinated. For an end to the endless loop of restrictions and relaxation, everyone in a free state is responsible. Merkel defended the resolutions that were passed. They think it's neither appropriate to push forward at this point in time nor to sit back. With a compulsory test for interiors with an incidence of 35 new infections per 100,000 inhabitants a week, an important further measure has been decided. It's not yet known how this rule will really work. We are promoting vaccination, we decide to test, but after that we have to continue to monitor the situation. That's how I see it, said Merkel. Berlin's governing mayor, Michael Müller from the Social Democrats, agreed with the Chancellor. He also only evaluates the meeting on Tuesday as an interim result. But there's no reason to always look sadly at the area. He recalled what he what had already been achieved. The lives of many had been saved, and concerts and events could now take place again. He says, "I think you can look to the future with confidence." Müller explicitly mentioned the end of the free tests for unvaccinated people. Those who are not vaccinated will have to pay for the corona test themselves from October 11th, as I said. And Müller emphasized he thinks this measure is right. Those who do not get vaccinated by choice are putting themselves and others at risk. Anyone who chooses this route must then expect to have to pay for the corresponding tests. The Social Democrat politician recalled the time when there was a desperate struggle for vaccines and made an urgent appeal to all adults to be vaccinated. In advance, many prime ministers urged that incidents should be abandoned. I made it a little longer version in the beginning of the video. And they didn't come to an agreement there completely. But even Merkel said designing such a traffic light is very complex. And she says, I have a very many variables that depends for the vaccination rate. And first of it all, it was the right day to try the 3G rule to dampen the rate of infection and to continue promoting vaccinations. And vaccines are not the problem. It's just the people not getting vaccinated. They're not going in the numbers. We had 1 million a week in previous times, and now it's about 500,000 because people just don't show up. And I really hope people go vaccinate. I'm fully vaccinated and I'm fine. And they always claim that it can harm them, but the infection in the first place is what harmed me with long COVID, and that's something that will harm me for quite some time. So think about it if you're not vaccinated yet. I'll see you in my next video. Bis bald.